We have a mask of the level's lighting. We'll now take this mask and introduce contrast in the light to shadow transitions. Lastly, we'll build controls to influence the color and intensity of the lit and shadowed areas independently. The result will be an effect on the level's lighting for a graphic style. Let's create an if statement. If I right-click and I type if, I can see under Math, it's the only option available. Now, an if statement is going to allow us to take a variable that we plug into A and then delineate by a variable we plug into B to determine if A is greater than B, equal to B, or less than B. We're going to be concerned with A is greater than B or A is less than B. So for our A variable, we're going to use our light mask. For our B variable, we're going to create a 1 vector or a scalar parameter, and we can do that by either holding 1 and left-clicking or S and left-clicking, which is going to add a parameterized 1 vector. And let's call this parameter light fall off and plug it into B. Now what we're going to do with this parameter is we're going to decide in a value between 0 and 1, we'll set the max slider to 1, as to whether or not A is greater than B or A is less than B. If we set this variable to 0, then A will be 100% of what we see. If we set it to 1, then B will be 100% of what we see. What we're going to be driving in our A is greater than B and A is less than B is going to be a colored version of our base color scene texture. So let's take the scene texture material expression as well as the red mask, and let's copy it and let's paste it. And now let's reintroduce the green and blue channels because we're going to want to add a color image to the light and the dark area. So now let's plug this into A is greater than B. Let's copy the same shader code and paste it once again and plug this into A is less than B. If we plug our if statement into the emissive and now hit save, we see that we have our base color back onto our scene. And the reason is because the shader code that's being plugged into A is greater than B is the same shader code that's being plugged into A is less than B. So currently, no matter what happens with this parameter, the result is going to look the same. So now let's create the ability to change the color and the intensity of the light area. If I hold 3 and left click, I can create a 3 vector, and then I can create a parameter from it. And I want to call this parameter light area color. So now if I multiply the base color by this new parameter, let's set the value to something near white, and then we'll plug the result of the multiply into A is greater than B. Now let's take these same two nodes, copy, and paste them once again, and we'll plug the base color that's going into A is less than B. We'll plug the result of the mask into the A input of the multiply, and the result of the multiply into the A is less than B. Now let's take our parameter and let's change the name from light area control to dark area control. And let's set the value to something close to black and hit save. So now, if I save my material, I can see nothing has happened once again because the light fall off value is set to 0, which means that the light area control is in charge of 100% of the image. If I begin to increase this value, I can now see that shadow is creeping into the image. Let's set this down a little bit so that we can see a bit more of the light area creeping in so that we can demonstrate how these controls are working. So now if I take my light area control and I open this and I begin to change the color, I can see that in the light areas, this control is having an effect. The same thing will be true for the dark area controls. Let's say we want our shadow areas to be something very red. In this manner, we can change the color and the intensity of our shadow and light independently. So let's remove the color and set a gray value for our dark area control. And let's also remove the color for our light area control. If I go over to my modes panel and I browse down to light and I drag a new point light into the scene, set it to movable and hit G to come out of game mode so I can see the controls. Once I move this light, I can now see on the mannequin how the lighting in the scene is having a direct effect on how the light to shadow areas fall off in a graphic manner due to our post-process material. If we jump back over into our sequencer view, we lock our camera, and we hit G to enter into game mode, we can see once again that due to the depth of field on the camera, we're getting a rather odd silhouette around the characters due to our post-process material that's crunching our lighting. In order to fix this, if we go back into our graphic lights material to the root node, if we set our blendable location from before tone mapping to earlier in the post-process pipeline, before translucency, and hit save, we can now see that our graphic lighting will behave correctly underneath depth of field, if depth of field is a look that you desire on your renders. By using a mask of the level's lighting and introducing color and contrast, we're able to realize a graphic effect. Using the controls in this material, we can affect where the light falls into shadow and how bright or dark the light and shadow areas are. We can also change the color of both the light and the dark areas. In the following course module, we'll examine another method for adding contrast and color to the level's lighting.